welcome to episode 284 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with...
Jesse?
Michael O'Malley.
You don't have a last name, Jesse?
I don't know what I was thinking. Jesse Alva.
All right. In today's episode, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we'll be continuing our SRK series with 1998's Dil Se. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. Oh, and we have another couple listener comments that we'll get into in the second part as well. So thank you so much to everybody who's been responding to the SRK series so far. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. Jesse, I'm going to kick it off with you. You caught a new release. It looks like the latest horror entry into the old box office.
Yeah, so I got to see The Turning earlier this week, I think, or last weekend. It was my sister-in-law's pick. She's like a young little teenager, and she's really into horror movies, and this was what she wanted to do for her birthday. So we took a really large group of teenage girls to The Turning. So basically the premise, it's directed by Floria Sigismondi. I hope that's how you say it, or somewhat close. And the premise is that it's set in the 90s too, or early 2000s. I don't really know why they wanted to do that, but they did. And a young governess, a young woman is hired to basically work as she's working as like a tutor, but it's more like a nanny almost, because she's really caring for this young girl in this huge mansion. At first it starts really nice, like she and the little girl hit it off really well, but then the boy, played by Finn Wolfhard from Stranger Things, shows up, and things just start to get rapidly start to get pretty dicey. I want to say that I really liked a lot of the movie. I thought it looked really good. I liked the styles a lot. So like the costuming I thought was just pretty fun. I liked kind of the hair and makeup, and as things start to get more and more stressful throughout, you're seeing kind of makeup and hair changes in the protagonist, Mackenzie Davis, which I think that any movie should have stuff like that. But I thought it looked good. It was kind of fun to see that part of her deterioration as well. I also really liked...
it was just like her... her face kind of got foggy, and she was just
and like her hair, just starts to get more unraveled and frizzy, and she just looks sleepy, and that's probably just making a good film 101. But I liked just to kind of see that part of it too. And I thought that it did do a good job kind of slowly kind of building the suspense. And I felt that the horror throughout was fairly subtle. I kept waiting for it to really get intensely scary, and for me it never really did. But regardless of that fact, I did like a lot of it. The score I also thought was just great. But it ended up just landing very stale for me. The kind of mysteries that you uncover about what's happened in this big house, regarding the former governess and I guess some other adult man who lived in the house. I don't remember what his relation to everybody else was in the house, but you find out some pretty bad stuff happened between them, and that their governess was killed. And so in that regard, I felt like maybe the movie was saying some interesting things about women in the workplace and having to put up with just really shitty dudes in the workplace that I think... in this case, it's pretty extreme, but I think in some ways, pretty much all women can relate to that aspect of I've known a pretty shitty dude in my workplace before, and you really like what you're doing, but this is really bringing it down. And so I liked kind of what it was doing for that part, but the last maybe 15 minutes of it just turns all that in on itself and changes the direction, and I thought it was just really stupid. From what I kind of understand about it was that the movie was in production hell for a while, and it was maybe originally going to be directed by what's the guy? Steven Spielberg. Is it Steven Spielberg? So it went from like a big name like that to Floria Sigismondi, who hasn't really made anything real big before. She did The Runaways with Kristen Stewart, which I saw, but that's the only thing I've heard of that she's done. And I think that due to so many complications of the movie, they just sort of released it. They were kind of like, well, we're done with this, and threw in this like dumb alternate ending in the movie itself that I think just sort of deflates everything that the movie built up to. Yeah, I don't know if y'all have seen it or had any interest in seeing it.
I was kind of interested. Isn't it sort of a sort of turn of the screw adaptation? Yeah,
it is. And I think it's a remake of, is it The Innocents, maybe?
Yeah, from like the 60s, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that
and
movie.
Andrew says it's really good, so yeah, you like that one too. I would like to see it. I don't know, it just ended up being ultimately pretty disappointing. I also will say that the first time I saw an ad for it was on Instagram, of all places, so I was kind of a little skeptical. Like, I don't think I've really seen any ads on Instagram besides like for perfume. I don't even know why I'm being targeted for perfume, because I don't really buy perfume. But so I was kind of like, well, this looks good, and I think that Mackenzie Davis is pretty cute, so yeah, I would like to see this movie. But I don't know. Maybe others would have a different opinion.
It's not as like a Conjuring or something like that.
Definitely not. I don't think it's as stylistically interesting, and I think that the horror, for what it is, was pretty good. I was kind of hoping it would get a little bit scarier, like getting a little more intense, but I think the ending is just really pitiful.
It seemed, I don't know, like I really have no interest in seeing it. I'm really glad it's out in theaters now, because I'm tired of seeing the trailer ahead of movies. Mainly because I was like, I don't see how you can make a horror movie and like you can make this horror movie and I'm supposed to be afraid of whatever like demon ghost thing is here, when honestly it seems like the Stranger Things kid is just being annoying as hell, and that seems to be like the real fear.
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just kind of funny that they still have room for. It seems like a movie that's so built on like jump scares and shit like that, which seems a little. I don't know. I'm surprised that they still make those. It seems like we kind of got past that.
Yeah, I don't know if I think that it is real like a jump scary kind of movie. I think some of the scares are a little bit like The Grudge, in that sometimes with that one you would kind of see the protagonist, but in the background you'd see like the monster, and so you're just kind of waiting on her to notice what you already see. So I don't know if like with jump scares usually it's just like boom, okay, there's the thing, but with this you're kind of seeing it, you're experiencing it before she is, and then you live that through. So
speaking of The Grudge, there was that Grudge remake. So I guess January is where they have space to make these, Zach.
Yeah, no, January is 100% the dump time. let's just dump a movie here, because I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
Cool.
So I got that in theaters, but if you want to go see an Instagram horror movie, then go for it.
Yeah. But you had another, I guess it's not really a new release, but it was on Netflix. They just released it on Netflix recently.
Yes. Yes. I'll let you kick that off though, Michael.
Oh, okay. So What Did Jack Do is a short film directed by David Lynch and co-starring David Lynch, co-starring with Jack the monkey of the title. This is a film released by Netflix on Lynch's birthday, I guess, a couple weeks ago. And yeah, the copyrights from like that's in the credits is like 2016 or 2017. So I'm not sure like if this played elsewhere before Netflix, but it was new to me. It's about David Lynch, who is like this hard-boiled cop guy interrogating this monkey who has the kind of like, have you seen those annoying orange videos online? He has like that effect on his mouth so that he speaks. And the two kind of go back and forth trading almost like detective noir cliches for 17 minutes, but they're cliches that are just a little off in that David Lynch kind of way, until it culminates in like a musical sequence. It's all very silly and kind of delightful and a little bit unsettling. So, it's like a David Lynch feature. We don't really know what Jack did, but he does a lot of things in this movie, like sing or order coffee. So I don't know, Jesse, what do you think about this?
Oh, Lord. I have a complicated relationship with David Lynch, wherein I think I have a very shallow enjoyment of him. I really like Twin Peaks. And everything else by him, I don't know what I think. So Andrew was like, we need to watch this monkey comedy by David Lynch on Netflix. And I was like, do we have to? And the answer was yes. So we did. It's bizarre. A lot of the first at least half. I mean, the whole thing, it's like 17 minutes, so it's fairly short. But the first half of it really, really felt like maybe they recorded something, but then somebody went in and did like a bad lip reading of it and just were throwing out some bizarro lines that look like that's what the mouths could have been saying. It's just a lot of really wonky, like, non sequiturs back and forth between them that maybe mean something, and I'm sure they mean something to David Lynch, but I don't really know what to make of it. And then, man, that poor monkey, like, I don't know if I think that he did kill whoever, but obviously the detective thinks so. Spoiler alert. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a kind of weird context in the movie where they're like in this train station that's been locked down, where they can't leave, and so there's like a purgatorial element to it. And it's all in black and white, and there's a weird undercurrent of like tragedy or sadness, maybe, but like as with David Lynch, the tone is really slippery, because you have these just like totally bizarre, like I think kind of hilarious lines, such as, for instance, they're talking about love, and then one of the characters says, "They say true love is like a banana, sweet with a golden hue," and then that's like mixed with like just this very subtle undercurrent of like something like legitimately sad, but it's only alluded to what that is in like the most opaque way. And so most of the movie is definitely just the kind of weird silliness, and then there's just these kind of off-key moments that gesture another way. I thought it was kind of delightful. It is, there's like the spectrum of David Lynch from like Eraserhead and Inland Empire, like that kind of David Lynch, all the way down to like Twin Peaks. And this definitely, to me, felt more like the Twin Peaks side of things, in which it's kind of like whimsical and sad and funny. And I don't know, I had a good 17 minutes.
I mean, it's definitely something. Did you make Rebecca watch it too, or did you just watch it by yourself?
Oh, no. I've never subjected Rebecca to a David Lynch movie, I think. It's so unpredictable.
Michael loves his wife, unlike some people, it seems like.
Wait. Was she not? I think she was over at your house when we watched Dune.
The whole time?
Which is
Part
the worst
of the time.
David Lynch movie I've watched.
Oh, geez. I
think she was over there for that. I can't remember, but
maybe for part of it, maybe a little bit. She wasn't watching it though.
I think that she would like some of his movies. I think others she would not like the sudden violence. And so for those out there who are interested, this doesn't have like sudden grotesque violence or anything like that. Like, it's not like Wild at Heart or that sort of thing.
I mean, I think depending on your headspace, you might really lose it in the musical number. I was just kind of like, well, this is this. I don't know.
It is. I mean, if you like David Lynch short films, you're probably going to like this one. It's like very much in the spirit of that. Maybe less freaky than some of the like rabbit ones.
Definitely.
But
Andrew first suggested it like one night right before bed, and I was like, listen, I'm not watching a David Lynch movie right before bed. I don't know what I'm going to see, and I don't know how that's going to affect my dreams, and no. So we ended up watching it the next day.
You're like, listen, dude, I need to go to sleep.
I just don't know what we're about to witness, and I need to be in a good headspace before I go to bed. So, but it really wasn't anything, no leaky chicken or anything like that. So,
you know, speaking of chickens, though, I do feel like we need to mention that there's a chicken in this movie whose name is Tutataban, which I think is about the greatest chicken name I've ever heard.
It's a good name. Very good. Better than Jack, for sure.
Yeah, Monkey needs to get his naming together.
I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, did you see the sack?
No. I see it on Netflix. I've seen it.
All right.
So I have not watched it.
You have seen that it exists.
I've seen that it exists.
You've not watched it.
And I've seen people like mention it, but I have not watched it myself. Well, What Did Jack Do is on Netflix. Michael, you had a couple movies you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and I'll try to be kind of short on these movies because I don't think either of you guys have seen them. But the first one I wanted to talk about, actually both of these I've kind of watched as catching up with the decade that has just expired, the 2010s. The first is Wuthering Heights. It's a 2011 movie directed by Andrea Arnold, who did Fish Tank and American Honey, and a couple other movies that I haven't seen. Really like American Honey. I like Fish Tank too. I liked Wuthering Heights, although I feel like it's maybe the least purely successful of the movies that I've seen. So it's adapting like the famous Emily Bronte novel, in which there is a young basically orphaned boy. He's like found in the streets by this like family who owns an estate, and they adopt him, and he strikes up a romantic relationship with one of their daughters whose name is Catherine. And so the book traces their like romance and life and death and all that between Catherine and Heathcliff, and the movie basically does that too, although it does a couple of things to kind of revise that. So like one, it's in like Andrea Arnold's style, which if you've seen her movies, it's like, really naturalistic, lots of shots of nature, lots of animals, the really kind of loose cinematic style in the sense that like, there'd be handheld camera or, I don't know if this is the case or not, but it feels like the actors are allowed to improvise a little bit. And so it has that, and then it also has the fact that, and this is like not an original reading of the novel. Like people have suggested this before, but this movie makes this explicit, which is that Heathcliff is Black, and so like the kind of psychological trauma that he carries with him from his past in the story is in this movie implied to have been like the result of some sort of servitude or slavery. You see like scars on his back at certain points in the movie. And then within this movie, and this is an addition from the novel, he's treated quite racistly by some around him. So there's that going on. And like, I think there are elements of it that are really good. The style is really amazing. The acting is really solid throughout. Although I had some issues with so there's like young versions of the characters played by one set of children actors, and there's old versions of the characters played by adult actors. And for Catherine, it's almost like comically improbable, the person that they chose to play adult Catherine, whose name I'm blanking on right now, but it's the lead from Crawl from from last year. And so she's kind of like tall and thin, whereas and has a different hair color from the other actress who's playing her as a kid, who's like really short compared to the other characters and has dark hair. But anyway, so it's good. I don't know if all the changes actually add up to a lot. A lot of Andrea Arnold's style kind of obscures some of the plottiness of the book, and you lose a lot of the big high emotional moments, which kind of define the novel. but it's worth watching. Like, it's a pretty striking adaptation. It changes it, it kind of shuffles things around in an interesting way. I think it's worth checking out if you're interested in Andrea Arnold, or if you're interested in like a kind of offbeat Wuthering Heights adaptation. The other one I watched is a movie called No, which is a Chilean movie directed by Pablo Larraín, I think is how you pronounce his name, who directed Jackie a few years ago, and also Neruda, which is my favorite of his. But this is a movie about in 1988, I guess, in Chile, there was like a nationwide vote in which the nation got to decide whether or not to keep their dictator Pinochet in power or not. And each side of the debate was allowed to have a certain advertising block on TV. So like if you wanted to vote yes, that you still wanted Pinochet to be in power, you would watch this one advertising block to see like all their, fascist propaganda, basically. But if you were one, for people who were voting no, there was like another block of advertising. So the movie is kind of it honestly reminds me a little bit of like maybe like Oscar bait, like what we might call with an English language movie, like Oscar bait, like The Post or something like that, where, this scrappy bunch has to, come together in a moment of historical import and pull off something. And in this case, it focuses on the advertisers that created the campaign for the no side. So they're like a ragtag bunch. Like some of them are like straight up communists. Others are, including our protagonist, is just like some like kind of centrist dude. The most striking thing about the movie, aside from like the historical context, is that it's all filmed in like it looks like a home movie camera, basically like on VHS. So I'm trying to remember what the exact camera specs are, but basically it's that kind of like video from the 1980s where you can see like the color separation a little bit, and so it looks like it was filmed in the 80s. And the reason why they do this is that they insert into the movie actual like film from the 1980s, like when this was happening. So like, for instance, there's a moment in which the police break up a protest, and you have shots of the characters, played by the actors in 2012 when this movie came out. And that's intercut with like, real news footage and stuff, which is done in the same camera. And so it's this really seamless effect where you can't, at least I, not knowing, what is real and what's not, like really had, felt like it really fit together. And that goes for the ads too. So you see the ad campaigns quite a bit. And I don't know how many of these ad campaigns are just like legit, like recordings of like what was going on in the 80s versus stuff that the movie created. Cause it's this really interesting effect. And it's really interesting aesthetically too, because the weird, like, distortions of like this like early video makes some like really interesting like lighting and coloring and some of this stuff, because it's the stuff is filmed more cinematically, has interesting lighting that you wouldn't have done like with the camera in the 80s. And so it creates these really cool effects on the characters, even though the movie itself otherwise is pretty conventionally told. So that's a pretty solid movie. If you're interested also in like other things by this director, I would really recommend Neruda as well. It's about Pablo Neruda, but it's a really offbeat take on Pablo Neruda's life. But No is also pretty good. It's got kind of that Argo or The Post vibes, but just about Pinochet instead of like Nixon or the, Iran incident. So anyway, No, Wuthering Heights.
So that camera choice that worked for you?
Yeah, I wasn't sure that it would at first, because I started watching it, and so the thing is in like a television ratio, like it's not really Academy, I guess, because it's slightly different than that, but like it's like it looks like it was like a television program from the 80s, like and like kind of a shitty television program from the 80s too. But I think the overall effect really works well, because I don't know about you, but sometimes, if you watch a movie that's filmed, today, and then they insert news footage from like the 60s or the 70s or whenever it's supposed to take place, like there's a distancing effect from that where you realize like at the moment, like, oh yeah, they're just taking this old footage and inserting it into this movie. Whereas in this one, it's so seamless that there's nothing distracting about when they actually do include media from the time that it's about. And I think that was pretty cool. And like I said, it looks kind of cool and distorted at times as well, and not just like a shitty, soap opera from the 80s or something.
Cool. Jesse, you had one more movie you wanted to talk about?
Sure, yeah. So the most recent movie I watched this week was The Bad Batch, directed by Anna Lily Amirpour. The only other movie, I don't know how many she's made, but the only one I've seen by her is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. This is a very tonally different vibe from A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. But I'd been kind of wanting to see it. I know it's one of Jessica's favorites, and so she shared that with our friend group this past Sunday or Monday. And I guess it's really hard to explain the premise, or it's a weird premise. I guess it's not that hard to explain. But the premise is, I guess, sort of like a dystopian future where certain people are just labeled as Bad Batch humans and outcasted into this desert wasteland outside of the U.S. Border, and just basically left to fend for themselves. So we follow the main character, Arlen, played by Suki Waterhouse. She's just basically been dumped in the desert. And the movie starts off pretty tense, where she's pretty shortly after getting just dumped out in the wasteland, she's abducted by cannibals and loses an arm and leg. And it doesn't spare the graphics on that. We see like a leg, or like a whole big chunk of a leg like sizzling on a grill. And I was not prepared. I mean, I knew it was a cannibal movie, but I didn't know it was gonna go like quite that hard. And so that was pretty jarring just for the first like 5 minutes, but basically pretty shortly after that she's able to escape, and against kind of all odds ends up in this weird little town. I was trying to describe it to my mom, who's always just like baffled by some of the movies I watch, and I was like, it's almost like I don't know. It's almost like an old abandoned town that people just found and just scrapped something together in it. It's just a lot of little like odd pieces. They've made up their own little economy. They don't use regular money. They use like dream dollars or something like that. And so it's just this like, because these people have just basically had to figure out how to make it in this lonely outcast world. And what's funny is when we were watching it for a good while in the movie, I guess I didn't realize that it was a dystopian movie. I kind of thought like, okay, so this girl just got out of jail and they've kind of like, well, you're out of jail, and kind of just left, locked the gates behind her on her way out. And so I guess in my head I was like, I guess, maybe somewhere in the desert there could be a little village of cannibals, and somewhere else there could be this little village of, scrappy people who've made their own little town and their own economy. And so I think at a certain point in the movie I realized, no, wait. This isn't supposed to be real. And I don't know which I like better. Like, do I like the idea that this could potentially exist somewhere in the desert, or do I like that it's definitely set in a dystopia? It's definitely odd. I don't know, like substance-wise, what you're supposed to pull from it. It's just really kind of a wacky, I don't want to say it goes like as hard as something like Spring Breakers, but I almost feel like it's comparable with this like little scrappy town. I think it's called Comfort, the name of the little town that she ends up in. And they just like to like party and do drugs, and there's this big DJ booth that is like a giant like cassette player, and inside the DJ is played by Diego Luna, and like Keanu Reeves is in it, and Jim Carrey is in it, and Jason Momoa obviously is like the main cannibal man.
Wait. So the DJs are cannibals.
No. Okay, so there's people who live in comfort, and they're like the little drug party people, and then there's the cannibal people. Man, I'm doing such good film criticism here. Jason Momoa is one of the cannibals. And I guess the main thrust of the plot is she ends up getting revenge on one of the cannibals, Jason Momoa's wife, and the daughter is like this little girl, and she's left to fend for herself, so she just sort of goes along with Arlen back to comfort, and so now Arlen is kind of dealing with has this little girl who is obviously grieving the loss of her cannibal mom, and then Jason Momoa is like trying to get his daughter back, and you just see a lot of Jason Momoa's like massive tits. There's just so much footage of his, like, I was overwhelmed by how much of him, like, how big and, like, muscly this man is. And I don't know. It's bonkers. Like I said, I almost could compare it to something like Spring Breakers. It doesn't go quite as, like, party hard as Spring Breakers, but I don't know. There's something I just found really, really fun about it. Like I said, I don't really know what I'm supposed to pull from. I know Anna Lily had said that she spent, according to Jessica, so I'm getting some secondhand information, but Anna Lily had spent some time in, like, in California, and I guess had talked to a lot of immigrants who and kind of learned a lot about their experiences. So I think some of this is supposed to be maybe an allegory for immigrants and how they can be treated and feel like outcasts. And I think Jason Momoa's character, he's actually labeled a bad batch person because he was an illegal immigrant, and so he was just kind of dumped in this wasteland, and I guess that's what led him to cannibalism. Yeah, and this, I mean, come on, with his big Miami man muscle, like, sprawled across his tits. I don't know. Nobody else liked it. Me and Jessica really liked it. I think everybody else was pretty stale on it. But I just think it's just so intriguing and fun, and you just can't really look away. Whether you're just, like, looking at Diego Luna, like, rocking as hard as he can in a cassette tape DJ set, or you're just, like, drooling at Jason Momoa's tits, or you're, like, just crawling across the desert wasteland with Suki Waterhouse. Like, it's just something so fun and bonkers and, like, stressful about it.
There's something for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also this, to me, I thought it was a pretty effective, like drug tripping sequence where she takes, like, some LSD, and you just start seeing, like, these little, like, light flecks on her face as she's talking to people, just, like, little, it almost looks like it could have been a light from the DJ set or something, but it's only on her body, and then you just start to see, like, the world sort of, like, almost look kind of mushy, where you kind of hearing her dialogue repeat, like, kind of fold in on itself and stuff, and then, you know, she ends up wandering out into the desert, and so she's just, like, mesmerized by the stars and just, like, wants to stare at them all night. But I thought that, like, the way it was shot and edited was just really clever and fun, and I don't know, I guess some people it might just read as totally dumb and goofy, but I really liked that sequence especially. I thought it was pretty effective. So, that's that. It's on Netflix. If people want to see it, I would recommend it, but I also would recommend her other movies, like Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's really good.
Would you, I know you said it wasn't the same as Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, but, like, how would you compare it as far as, like, if someone's looking to, you know, get into the director, which is the better,
like, explore her as, like, an auteur.
Yeah.
Gosh, well, it's also been quite a while since I've seen Girl Walks Home. But, I mean, they do both focus on these female protagonists who are living in these sort of weird dystopian future cities. They both do kind of deal with eating people in a way, because Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is about this woman who's a vampire, and this movie is about cannibals. And I guess, you could probably draw some comparison of these experiences of women falling in love and like some dangers that can go along with that. But I don't know. It's probably not fair for me to make that analysis right now. It's been a while since I've seen Girl Walks Home Alone, but I'd say check them both out. They're both really good. But very tonally different.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back talking about Dil Se after this.
Hey, Cinematariats, this is your co-host Lydia Creech with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we definitely want your money. We still want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema, but now we're getting into the Patreon game, baby. We've brought on a lot of new voices to contribute to the site, and we want to honor our responsibility to compensate all these smart people for their hard work. To help us out, head over to patreon.com/cinematary to sign up at the $5 a month level. In exchange, our patrons will get an exclusive bonus episode every month, weekly shoutouts on each episode of the show, and the ability to dictate a movie for us to cover eventually. If money's tight, we get it. There are still a few things you can do that we would greatly appreciate. First, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That's free to help us reach more listeners. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send an email to Zach at cinematary.com. That's Zach, Z-A-C-H, to let us know your thoughts, and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we put out every week. So, to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, share with your friends and family, and sign up to be a patron. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show.
चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 छैया.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 284 of Cinematary. In this part, we'll be continuing our SRK series with 1998's Dil Se, directed by Mani Ratnam, from a script by Ratnam and Tigmanshu Dhulia. The film stars Shah Rukh Khan, Manisha Koirala, and Preeti Zinta. The film follows journalist Amar, who falls for a mysterious woman on an assignment, but she does not reciprocate her feelings. Just to say, poor journalism skills in this one. Not a great journalist. However, when Amar is about to get married, the woman shows up at his doorstep asking for help. The film is the final installment of Ratnam's thematic trilogy that consists of Roha from 1992 and Bombay in 1995. It has also been described as an example of parallel cinema, a film movement in Indian cinema that originated in the state of West Bengal in the 1950s as an alternative to the mainstream commercial Indian cinema. Inspired by Italian neorealism, parallel cinema began just before the French New Wave and Japanese New Wave and was a precursor to the Indian New Wave of the 1960s. The movement was initially led by Bengali cinema and produced internationally acclaimed filmmakers such as Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Ritwik Ghatak, Tapan Sanya, and others. It later gained prominence in other film industries of India and Bangladesh. It is known for its serious content, realism, naturalism, symbolic elements with a keen eye on the socio-political climate of the times, and for the rejection of inserted dance and song routines that are typical of mainstream Indian films. Dil Se is said to be a journey through the 7 shades of love that are defined in ancient Arabic literature. Those shades are defined as an attraction, infatuation, love, reverence, worship, obsession, and death. The character played by SRK passes through each shade during the course of the film. Authors Sangeeta Gopal and Satyajita Murthy of Global Bollywood Travels of Hindi Song and Dance also compared Khan's romance in the film to the trajectory of love in ancient Arabic literature, believing the lyrics in 2 of the songs to have delivered an apocalyptic fatalism. Elke Bomer and Stephen Morton, in their book Terror and the Post-Colonial from 2009, believe that the songs and their exotic locations in the film were very important in masking the impossible reconciliation between a terrorist and an uptight government agent by evoking pure fantasy. They argue that this is a phenomenon called the liminal space of dreaming, and that the terrorist woman cannot fulfill her sexual desire, so the songs fill the void of this desire by, quote, their sumptuousness and exotic locales in the Ladakh region. Though Dil Se received a poor box office response in India, it found success overseas. The film became the first Indian film to enter the top 10 in the United Kingdom box office. Even 2 months after its release in September 1998, the film was still screened on 5 screens 5 times per day, with an average of 3,000 spectators across all screens in the Cineworld complex in West London. Manisha Koirala, who played Moina or Megnon in the film, said that Dil Se is one of her most treasured films, adding that, for me, this film is a poetry. On that note, let's before we jump into kind of a deeper discussion on Dil Se, I do want to read this comment from somebody that just goes by SN. And this is a comment related to our DDLJ episode. And they said, I would like to add some cultural aspects that you 3 have missed. The morning after scene is very important to the Simran character because of the taboo around premarital sex in India. Indian society is patriarchal. It is common to term women who are not virgins before marriage as spoilt or disgraced. In extreme cases, such girls are killed by their family. Google honor killing. So the most important aspect of the scene is the part of where Raj explains that nothing happened between them, and though she might think of him as a jerk, he knows what honor means to an Indian girl. This scene is widely criticized by feminists in India as promoting the taboo rather than breaking the stereotype. True, however, the movie wouldn't have worked if it had been about breaking the stereotype. It worked because it reflected the complex duality that young Indians face when exposed to modern values that contradict cultural values. If you have ever interacted with Indians in the United States, you might notice that this duality exists in most Desi families. Both Raj and Simran are quintessential Indian characters. Raj, being exposed to a Western world and blessed with a more relaxed father, still knows Indian values and cherishes it more than India, brought up by Kuljit. The film does not essentially glorify Indian values as higher than Western. The dream sequence of Tajuk Dekha song, one of the most romantic songs of all time, after Raj meets Simran in India, shows them living a life with the best of both worlds. Simran, on the other hand, is a little bit of a rebel. The clothes she wears are more Western than when she is away from her dad. She, her sister, and mom dance to Western music, but as soon as her dad enters, she switches on the traditional Punjabi music, and they all go back to being dutiful family members. She manipulates her dad into letting her go on a trip. She gets woken up early and sings her dad's favorite devotional hymn as to cajole him into agreeing. It's exactly similar to the act that Raj puts up as he requests Baldev to open his shop. Simran gets drunk and lets go of her inhibitions created by her uptight upbringing. She breaks down when she realizes she might have slept with Raj because there would be too much of a departure from her Indian roots. Simran's clothes and demeanor changes after coming to India. She decides to marry as per her dad's wishes. It's a story of every Indian girl who dreams of a better life but settles down to patriarchy. Raj rescues her from a life she does not want, making his character very much loved by Indian women, a Prince Charming of sorts. With Raj being a jerk, it kind of suited SRK's 90s persona. He is a lovable rogue in the film. It's hard to explain, but considering the stereotypical male film heroes of 90s Bollywood, everything SRK did in the 90s was rebellious. His characters, be it Kabhi Han Kabhi Na, Yes Boss, Ram Jane, Hum Tumhari Han Sanam, etc. have had bits of gray, while some were downright dark, like Dar, Bazigar, and Anjam. These are roles with other heroes, which other heroes never touched, as they were scared that it would make the audience hate them. Talking about conventional Bollywood, where screen heroes become real-life demigods as well. Everything a hero did on-screen or off-screen were whitewashed to maintain a clean image. In a sense, SRK broke stereotypes by being brash off-screen as well. He spoke his mind, joked around, and paved the way for a more sophisticated film industry and film personalities that we have now. Which to SN, thank you so much for sending this piece of fan mail in and some comments on the episode. But also, I think it's a nice lead into Dil Se, which in that episode on DDLJ, we talked a lot about kind of the relationships, the kind of relationship between the SRK character and the main female lead, and how he's trying to woo her over and win her affection. In that one, I think it's a little in Dil Se, compared to the movies that we've watched so far when it comes to SRK trying to woo the female lead. This one's a little bit more complicated, as you have this character, Meghna, who is it's not really explained in depth until very late in the movie, her backstory, but she's just this very reserved character who you don't really see necessarily see the push and pull of like a romance blossoming that you would in a lot of other or at least especially the three movies that we've talked about so far in this series. So for you, yeah. And so I guess to kind of open up the discussion, I'm curious what you made of kind of the relationship between these two characters, and how that kind of quote unquote romance kind of happened. I mean, what did you make of the whole the whole romancing of Meghna by SRK's character Amar?
Yeah, I don't know who that question was directed to, but I guess I can
Just
start.
Anybody.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, it really is a tonally different from the other two that I watched, which was DDLJ and Kamina. Whereas those are really like playful and fun movies, like a kind of romantic comedies, will they, won't they? And while this kind of is a will they, won't they too, I feel like it's this real shift of like kind of a childhood love to this more serious, and maybe a little bit more realistic romance between like an Indian woman and an Indian man. And that's something about the movie that I really wasn't sure what to make of, and I didn't want to rate it on Letterboxd or anything until I got to listen to this episode, and now I get to be on this episode, so I'm happy to be processing it, with you guys. But I guess I'm coming from like a Western feminist perspective of, when a woman says no, go away over and over again, and then that's not honored. That can be very frustrating and maybe even a little bit scary. This guy shows up to her house. He gets like beat up by her family, and then like manages to, really just the first scene, where they're together on the train, and then she ends up seeing him in town later. That's a little weird. I mean, that might have been weird for her. That would be weird for me, where I saw this man in a completely different town flirting with me, and then he shows up in the town where I just so happened to be also. And later he shows up at her house. He just hops on a bus with her and travels all the way out across the country to the desert. There's a lot of this, like, push and pull where she's really just telling him, go away, I don't like you, I'm already married, and this and that and that, and he still keeps pursuing her. And so, like, from, like, I think, like, a Western feminist perspective, that's a little scary and very frustrating. And I wish I had, like, a better cultural context of, how this maybe might not be so unusual or so frowned upon from, like, an Indian perspective. And that might be the case. But on the other hand, I think that we also see this major contrast of the characters that we see in the movie proper. She's this really kind of quiet, almost like mousy woman. She just looks so small and fragile, like she's just going to blow away if a big gust of wind hits her. And you can see that I think he maybe sees that too, and he just like loves her, and he just sees her as just so small and beautiful, and like he wants to protect her and he wants to love her. And maybe he also is thinking there's something sketchy and scary going on with these men that she's surrounded by, because they make a comment like, we're her brothers, but we're going to marry her. And so like, I think maybe he is sensing that there's some kind of danger surrounding her and he wants to protect her. Whereas, so you see her character like that. But then in the musical sequences, I think you mentioned this earlier, Zach, in your introduction, you see like a completely different character from her. She's just like really, really vibrant and passionate, and I would say pretty sexual too. Just like really thrusting, and like this tiny little woman is just like this amazing dancer. To me, between the three Shah Rukh Khan movies I've seen now, this by far had the most beautiful musical sequences. They were just gorgeous, and I thought that the music was just really, really beautiful too. Like the songs themselves were great, but the way they were shot in those scenes was just jaw-dropping. I really, really liked the music in DDLJ too, but this is just on another level, and it really just blew me away. But the point I'm trying to make is that her character is just such a major contrast, and maybe that's supposed to reflect like the desire that she really does have for him that she's having to bury, because she, what we end up finding out is that she's carrying a lot of trauma, and she's carrying a lot of fear and anger, and she isn't really mousy, but she's very brave, and also maybe a little scared and angry, and she knows that even if she thinks this man is cute, and even if she has desires for him, they can never be, because she's on a mission, and that's her number one dedication above everything else. It's really beautiful, and but like I said, I wasn't sure completely what to make of the way his character is, and I think it's a little more, it's definitely more aggressive than it is in, for example, the two other movies, DDLJ and I'm sorry, I'm ruining that name.
Well, it's just to kind of add to that. I really enjoyed this review by on Letterboxd by Yush, who was supposed to be on the episode, but things came up and he wasn't able to be on it. But I really like what he says. He says, I feel like I can't sufficiently talk about this movie without a lot of time and effort, but whether you look at this as a microcosm for the tragic impossibility of reconciling liberalism with radicalism, or of violence with conscience, or of trauma with forgiveness, or all of the above, as an adaptation of myths as old as time itself through very modern, very real cultural anxieties, is simply a triumph of visual storytelling. It's as beguiling, enigmatic, complex, challenging, and haunting as cinema can get, and a must watch for anyone who takes the medium seriously, which is incredibly high praise. The thing I really like his first part though, where he says it's the kind of the impossibility of reconciling liberalism with radicalism, because you have this character, this very radical character in Mignon, and you have, as you're describing the Amar character, the SRK character, as this very, he's playing very similar to what he's done in a lot of these movies, which is this kind of this character with a lot of bravado, this kind of very somewhat macho, but just very confident kind of person. And I think that I think that what it comes down to, and especially when it comes to like his, I guess, political leanings compared to her political leanings, where he is somebody who, I think there's just like this kind of push and pull between what he feels like is best for, which seems to be the right path for everybody, and what she feels like needs to be done because there are no other answers, because she has seen she has seen everything from both sides. I mean, she's seen the most tragic, terrible outcome, but she's but she's also been kind of seen to an extent from his side. I think that's kind of the use of the musical sequences in this movie, because the musical sequences are are set up in very different manners than previous movies, where it's not like they really glide into one another as kind of as like part of the narrative. I mean, they're part of the narrative, but they don't have that natural flow that the other movies have. These ones seem to be speaking more to kind of, as I mentioned, like a pure fantasy, it's kind of like how they're wrestling with these differences and these anxieties in a way that is really interesting, because you have these incredibly evocative sequences. I think that out of all the movies that we've watched so far, Dil Se's sequences are just, I mean, you have from the first one where they're on just the choreography on this train, to the one where it's Megnan and Amar running through, like dancing through a battle, like a battleground, to the like dripping, the very sexual one between Amar and his fiance. Like there, it's working. It's kind of telling the soul of the movie in a way that I found to be rather incredible, because it's using these kind of functions of a Bollywood movie in a way to speak to these like really these kind of these socio-political underpinnings that I don't know, I found to be really incredible. Michael, what did you make overall of kind of what this movie's trying to do?
I am unsure of a lot of things. I think like you two, I'm definitely lacking some of the cultural context. My initial thought when the movie finished is maybe I'm harsher on the SRK character than I'm supposed to be, but my feeling is that he was sort of an anti-hero. And at the beginning of the movie, I was frustrated kind of for the same reasons Jesse was talking about with him's pursuit of Meghna. But by the end of the movie, I felt like that I was maybe supposed to be frustrated with it, because by the end of the movie, his pursuit of her ensures both of their destruction.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose at the end. I mean, like, nobody gets what they want.
Well, it's not really a lose-lose. What it is a loss for Amar. It's a loss for Meghna. It's a loss for Meghna's cause. Because over the credits, you see the cops, totally like dismantling their group, right? And so the Liberation Front that she's part of, like, loses as a result of his actions. His relentless romantic pursuit of her, like, ruins any sort of, like, whether or not really the Liberation Front's plan would have resulted in some justice or true, like, independence for the region. We never get to see whether it would have or not, because SRK's character comes in because he's this hopeless romantic, kind of like fudges the whole thing, and in the result kills both himself and Meghna. I don't know if we were supposed to go into spoilers, but my feelings were like entirely shaped by like maybe the last 15 minutes or so of the movie, where I think that the protagonist Amar, I don't think he comes off very well at all, and maybe it's just my own personal politics and having preferred like the revolutionaries to the him being the kind of centrist liberal-y guy. But I don't know, but I really like the movie. Like, it's super compelling, and like the sort of like inevitable tragedy of his pursuit of her is really compelling, I think. But my feeling was with a pretty large ironic distance from him as like a protagonist. And a lot of those early like dance sequences, like the one on the train, which is great. Like, if a movie wants, a straight pathway to my heart, a musical sequence on top of a train is the way. But like, so a lot of the ones in which there's sensuality and romance, in the context of where the movie eventually goes, it feels like kind of bitterly ironic, like those early ones. And again, maybe some of this is my missing cultural pieces. Like I honestly do not have a great understanding of any of the politics that they're talking about in the movie beyond what the movie presents. But at least within the movie, Megna's character's cause is presented like pretty sympathetically, I would say, in a lot of ways, especially because she gets that flash. There's a flashback late in the movie in which we see kind of how she became radicalized, which is that her family was like, straight up murdered and raped. And I think that there's a huge amount of sympathy that the movie gives toward Megna in the movie, and specifically like her ideology and whether or not she's supposed to go through with the plan, which is that she's a suicide bomber. She goes through with it anyway, regardless of what he said. But the only thing is that action only destroys SRK and herself rather than having a political aim. And I don't know. This is where I get into, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go with it. I'm kind of compelled by what I saw, but I don't know the larger implications because I have a very fuzzy idea of like the political situation at all. I don't know if you guys felt that way.
Well, he definitely is a character where I wasn't sure. I'm still not really sure where to land with him. Because like like I said in the previous movies, they're a little more lighthearted with the I don't know if stalking is the right word for the other movies, but where he's kind of pursuing them. But there is this like push and pull, and the women are definitely into it, and they end up falling in love with him. Whereas this one, I feel like the culminating moment of like, is what he's doing kind of sketchy, or is this okay? Is they're kind of wandering around in the desert, and he starts like yelling at her and like calling her a whore and telling her that she's been leading him on, which is like a classic bad. Like, don't ever do that to women.
But
like,
and she wasn't leading him on at all.
Yeah, she was not leading him on in any way at all. Like, maybe there were a few moments where she was like kind of nice to him versus like saying go away, but she did nothing to lead him on. And then there's like, they're kind of yelling at each other, and she's kind of shoving him, and then she's triggered, like literally triggered, like psychologically, because she's remembering like this moment in her past where she was shoving and running and like really scared, and so like he literally re-traumatizes her in that moment. And so it was really hard to be rooting for him when that happened. But I mean, I think that he ends up handling it okay, where he's like, has something like this happened before? It's okay, breathe. And he kind of like talks her through it. But I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in Timmy's credit, after that scene is when he starts, like, he kind of gives up the romance for a bit and gets engaged and everything. But yeah, like I just to be clear, I like the movie quite a bit. Like, it was a really great experience watching it. But what it means, I have broad ideas, and when you get down to the nuances, it gets really fuzzy. I really wish we had someone who was maybe more familiar with the whole, like, situation and implications, like cultural and political here. Because I would love to hear about that.
And then just, so I don't forget to say this later, what you were saying about that scene, the flashback scene, it just, that whole scene with her, like the way it was showing it with her voice, like over narration, is just chilling. Like, I just thought it was just so well done. Jaw-dropping, gut-wrenching. It's a beautiful and tragic scene, but I thought that part of the movie was just so, so well done. Even though that's kind of a non sequitur here, but yeah, I don't know. And yeah, I do wish that we had somebody with some a little more context. I know Andrew was talking to one of his sister's friends who's Indian about the movie, and she was saying that she really, really loves it. And he was kind of talking to her about the complicated feelings we have towards those two characters. And one of the things that she'd said was that maybe in Indian culture, men do a little bit more of the pursuing, and women, maybe take less of a role in that. And so, the way that she's kind of like, no, I don't want to, I don't want this. And with him kind of saying, well, let's give this romance a chance. Like, I really love you. Maybe that's a little more typical in the culture, but I don't want to speak. This is secondhand information. I don't want to speak for that. And maybe we'll get a listener to write in and share that context with us.
I will say when there are some pretty great like comic moments with his pursuit, though, especially at the beginning. So he meets her on like the train platform, and it's like raining and just miserable, and he's all like infatuated with her, like basically at first sight. And she's like, "Can I have some tea?" And he goes to get the tea, and she's left by the time he comes back, which I think is a great like. I don't know if she was intentionally trying to get rid of him or not. That's definitely how I read it. And so he's just sitting there holding this tea in the rain.
No, he's pitiful. But I love, too, how he's just able to, like, very quickly rope this little vendor into this romance. Like, no, you gotta help me. I'm in love with this girl. Like, just met her 3 seconds ago. I need to give her tea. And the guy, like, just pretty quickly gets on board. He's like, okay, yeah, you're right. And like, makes him the tea. It's really cute. But maybe she didn't know her train was going to be there. Or maybe she was like, oh, get this guy out of my sight. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to read her. And that's why I think maybe through those musical sequences, we're supposed to kind of get like a window into, it's almost like dreamy, like, you know, what they kind of wish they could have with one another, but can't. No.
It's interesting that you say that, because when I was watching the movie, I definitely thought that the musical sequences were meant to be just from his perspective. Because, especially like in the opening, you have the train, and she's already left on the train, so he's presumably by himself and like daydreaming about like his this woman he just met, but it is more interesting for Megna's character to have her be a participant in the dream sequences as well, and that's kind of like an interesting element, that it's like their two psyches are creating this rather than it's just being his, like, you know, daydream.
Yeah, I think you could read it either way, honestly. I think it's a little bit more likable of a movie if you don't think of it as all his just, like, you know, horny dreams, but maybe it's like they're both feeling this way, but they're expressing it differently.
Well, I said it before, but I think that I read the dream sequences as, or the musical sequences as being kind of these as these ways to process, because I think for the most part the rest of the movie is pretty serious, you know, from him kind of you know, looking into this, you know, this terrorist organization and what they're, you know, what they're looking to do. You also have like the incredibly serious plot that you know, she's involved in with this group of people. I mean, you have this kind of sequence where he chases the one guy, and then the guy, you know, inconsequently runs into the police and ends up getting, biting a cyanide and dying. And so I think it's a pretty, for a movie that kind of has elements of the other movies that we've seen, where it's like, you know, boy meets girl, there's kind of a push and pull, then you know, there's some sort of marriage is happening that they have to reconcile with. There's a lot of, I mean, the last 30 or so minutes of the movie turns incredibly serious and becomes like a full-fledged thriller for that last part. And I think that that's what the role of the musical sequences are in this one, rather than being kind of these flowery fantasies to kind of enhance the kind of love. It's more just a reality break from this kind of incredibly crushing, you know, political situation that both of these characters, especially her, are in, because, you know, I don't really see her necessarily as somebody who is completely against him. You know, you have that scene when they're in the desert where it's right before she leaves him, where she's clearly engaged in the kind of conversation that they're having. I mean, I don't think that necessarily warrants like they're like super in love, but there's clearly kind of this flirtatious attitude toward that at least shows that she's not like, this person is the worst person of all time. And so I think that I feel like that's why the musical sequences kind of work as somewhat of a dialogue between them, where I think it's because of the way that he's like pursuing her so heavily, that that you assume that they're kind of coming from his perspective, but I think that they're just more of like a kind of group wide break between the very pressing narrative plot points that we're kind of bouncing around to.
Almost like a chorus or something in like a Greek tragedy or something.
Yeah, kind of like that, because they're so I mean, it's just incredible. They're just so, like, the choreography and everything in it is so incredible, and so, like I said before, evocative, that it's, you know, I don't know, it seems to me like it's really working on this it's working on this register that's very different from the other three movies that we've watched.
Yes, yeah. I think that, like you said, the choreography, like all those musical sequences, I loved them in DDLJ and the other one that I watched, but this is just another level. They're gorgeous, and just so much like energy like thrown into their like big body movements. Yeah, I mean it's beautiful. I just want everybody to see this because it's gorgeous and so powerful.
Yeah, it's almost 3 hours long. What is it, like 2 minutes or 2 hours and 40 minutes or whatever? But it is exciting the whole time through. And the musical sequences are pretty long themselves, and they maintain this really high energy, which I think is really impressive. Like just that feat of pacing.
What do you make of kind of the whole handling between his character and the arranged marriage? I feel like the character Preeti is kind of interesting, and honestly, compared to some of the other romantic interest over the past three movies, has a lot more personality.
Yeah. I honestly was kind of rooting for her. You know, the movie really it ends up landing on a tragedy, but I don't know. I loved her just honesty and her energy, and I was really kind of sad because, you know, and I was telling Andrew too when we were watching it, like, I wish he would just like her, and he was like, you don't think they're really going to end up together, do you? And I was like, I guess not, but I don't know. She's just, it's almost like she's just kind of a lot more like self-aware than some of the other characters we've had, where she's like, listen, I've had some boyfriends, you've had some boyfriends, like, you know, and we're not going to forget about those, or you've had some girlfriends, we're not going to forget about them, but like, let's just make the most of what we got out of this situation. And she's just so cute, and I don't know, I was sad that didn't work out, honestly.
Yeah, for a character who basically exists in that like kind of thankless role of the alternate love interest that clearly is not going to ever be the one that the protagonist ends up with. Like, she's a really fleshed out and enjoyable character, even though the plot itself didn't really mandate her to be that. And I really... And
it is kind of just fun to see too, like, him, like his character, Shah Rukh Khan's character, getting into an arranged marriage situation, like as opposed to in previous movies, the women that he was interested in getting put into arranged marriages. So, and then kind of how, like, I guess a man a perspective might be feeling, dealing with something like that, like a marriage that he doesn't really want and is kind of settling for. And I kind of wish we could have got to see how that would have played out. I kind of want to watch a movie now, like, where the plot isn't, okay, we're leading up to, you know, are we going to get married or whatever, but just kind of seeing, I guess, the early stages of two people who had just gotten married in an arranged marriage and how they deal with that. And I'm sure that exists, but I guess I was thinking, like, I would like to see these two characters, like, actually get married and how they kind of deal with learning to love one another and kind of heal from past relationships too. So, yeah. What did you think, Zach?
Yeah, like I said, I thought she had I thought she had like this real breadth of personality. This was actually the actress's first Bollywood movie that she had done, and I just felt like she had this really effervescent kind of personality to her that it was such a kind of strange, stark contrast from the very insular character that is Megna. You know, like she's. You know, it's kind of funny because you're like, those are the two characters, her and Amar, I guess, are the ones who were like technically positioned to be kind of rooting for as the love, you know, the you know, the love interest. But there's something about about Petrie's personality that was really I don't know, that made it kind of sad that he really wasn't offering a chance to her to kind of be that person for him. And the last thing before we kind of wrap up on this, you know, we talked a little bit about, and it's tough because we don't have like the full kind of cultural connotation of like the kind of politics of the, you know, of this movie, especially kind of the last 30 minutes or so. But I do find it interesting going back to Yusha's review. You know, it's SRK's character is complicated because he does like it's the constant movie is this fight between kind of, as Michael, you described, that kind of centrist liberalism, and then you have this very radical character. And to me, what I was kind of thinking about with it afterwards is just how that you kind of constantly have that fight within you, because I don't know, maybe I'm not interpreting it correctly, but I never really saw his character as even though he is, you know, this quote government agent who's working for like the radio the government radio station. He never really struck me as this kind of purely nationalistic character. Like he kind of went through the motions of like, this is kind of my job and duty, but he was also somebody who was going into like the terrorist camps and like interviewing the leaders and kind of questioning them and stuff in a way that at least displayed a degree of curiosity that I don't think that a kind of a more conservative government would have. And so he seemed like somebody who was kind of breaking away from what the more traditional outlook would be. I mean, he mentions that his father was an officer and kind of uses that as more of a kind of a safety net to kind of keep him from falling. I guess to make the point that, I mean, he uses that as kind of a safety net to keep himself separated from, because there is still that fear in that kind of making that radical jump. And so a lot of that anxiety that comes in those last moments are a little bit are less about like the romance and just the, to me, just the impact that her plan kind of had. I don't think the movie necessarily has an idea of like good or bad where this is going to be leading us, but there's something very, it really has this kind of strong impact in those final moments that I think leaves you thinking about how we're unable to kind of understand the consequences of making a giant decision, kind of like what she was going to do, but also our misunderstanding on the trauma, on how to kind of deal with trauma and understand how to work through trauma, and try to find some sort of forgiveness, because it was sad that I was really interested in that, but at the same time the movie kind of is going through that so quickly near the end that it's kind of difficult to process.
I think like there's also like the idea of trauma on a national level too, and I don't know how much there is to this analogy, but when the whole context of the climax is that there's going to be a parade celebrating the independence from Britain, right? The 50 years. And my and the contrast or the tension being like, this is a country that's celebrating itself as being liberated from an oppressor that in itself has become an oppressor. And like, I can only put that within the context of America and my own experiences, like you're celebrating the 4th of July or whatever, while at the same time, like, there's like freaking like the, Dakota Access Pipeline and, all that stuff, in which like we kind of celebrate the overthrowing of oppression while at the same time allowing
there's immigrant children in cages.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess like there's that too. And the thing that's so hard to deal with when you get to like kind of national holidays is that the whole point of a holiday is celebration, but sometimes it doesn't seem like celebration is the appropriate response. And that's of course like the Liberation Front is going to use that, exploit that as a way of like, presenting, their bid for liberation, I guess, by, undermining the celebration of like the nationalist holiday. And like, I don't know, I guess I find that idea really compelling, or just that struggle really compelling too, is on a national level, when you have national trauma, how do you deal with that? And that whole push and pull between, do you confront trauma head on? Is worth in like, finding some sort of solidarity as a nation and that sort of thing. And I think I mentioned earlier, I think that the Liberation Front is presented really sympathetically, at least for me in the movie, more so than like, let's say the government, like, I don't know if they're cops or the army or whatever that rounds up everybody at the end. But I mean, as a conflict for a movie, like what it actually reminded me of a little bit is Nashville. Have you guys ever watched Nashville? Like the ending of that movie is totally that tension of, do we address a trauma that's happened, or do we continue with our celebration, like our kind of jingoistic, that's the inappropriate term to use here, our nationalistic, celebration. And I like I said, I don't really know what to do with the specifics in this movie because I don't have that context, but at least for me, that was what I kept returning to in my head.
Yeah, it's like you wish that there could be a solution that isn't either one of theirs. Like his is basically just ignore it, let's get married and run off together.
Well, I think that like, at least for me, it's in the movie, and I think in America too, like the radical solutions are underexplored. Like they're always stopped, like happens in the movie. And I think that there's a certain tragedy in that as well, is that we don't know. The only thing we know is basically like what, the ruling forces have imposed, and what the ruling forces have imposed is the celebration continues and the nationalism continues. You don't get to see the alternative. And I think the movie shows us the same thing, which is that, we don't get to see what happens if the radicals have, their plan put to fruition. And it may be horrible. I don't know, but like we don't actually get to see what it is. And I feel the same way all the time in the United States, is that we have been presented with like a sort of stasis for so long that we don't have any sort of a collective imagination for different, except on like, some really basic level.
Yeah, I think, that's kind of, I think that you bring up a good point. That's the one thing that I kind of left thinking about, is just that, kind of having to carry these two, stones in the same hand of, yes, on the 4th of July, yes, we're celebrating, breaking away from the oppressor. But then if you looking at it now, you're like, no, we're not. We're, absolutely no better than Great Britain or anybody else. We might be worse, actually. So, I agree. It's like this kind of, and I think that this movie does a great job of kind of, handling that, right? Because like you have the SRK character who, as we've discussed, is kind of so I think that we get so frustrated with him also, not only just because of the way he's like approaching trying to woo this woman, but also before we even have the reveal of like what happened to her family and everything, like kind of her trauma, like you can see that there is something there that we can't really comprehend, and that seems to be kind of the through line for this movie, is him kind of being oblivious, trying to push those memories away to make these kind of happy memories. He even is kind of saying that at the end of like let's just run away from all this and create happy memories. But I don't as the movie kind of ends with, like, it's just not that easy to kind of push away all of that history and that trauma, and just kind of pretend like it didn't happen. It's like you have to kind of find a way to reconcile with both of them. And I guess the frustrating thing about the movie is that it doesn't really give you like an answer to like how you do that. It just kind of, I guess pun intended, goes up in smoke and I don't know. I guess that's what's kind of great. At least to me, what was great about it is that it did leave you thinking about kind of these philosophies.
Right. They're operating on like very different hierarchies of need. Like, whereas he's just looking for this like love and fulfillment, and she's just like basically just trying to survive. Like, she doesn't even have a home to live in, and like she can't get past what's happened to her. She's never been able to get past it, and she was a child and she got a gun in her hand, and this is the life she's lived forever, like constantly being reminded and faced with this horrible thing that she's experienced. So I think that's another like reason why they can't be together, is just because they're just operating in two very different wavelengths.
Well, I believe that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Also, patreon.com/Cinematary. We have a new film theory and chill. We were talking about Andre Bazin and the evolution of film language. I think it was a pretty good chat. I talked about Ghost for a long time in the chill part, so if you're like into that, that's there. But yeah,
like
thank you.
The clay, like pottery ghost.
No,
thing?
Like paranormal, like ghost, like in the spaces. So.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about the movie, which I was into.
Patrick Swayze dead ghost movie.
Yeah, where they make the pottery.
Maybe next film theory and chill, maybe.
It was very much on the other side. Thank you to our patrons, though: Cam, Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Cindy Roberts, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we'll be continuing our SRK series with Om Shanti Om. So please join us then. Thanks for listening.